The 25th chapter of the Gospel, according to Matthew, closes a long discourse that Jesus delivers privately to his disciples on the Mount of Olives, shortly after he has left the temple for the last time. Asked what sign would mark the end of the age, he had spoken of wars and false prophets and the coming destruction of Jerusalem, then turned to parables urging watchfulness, 10 young women waiting with their lamps, servants entrusted with their master's money. The chapter now moves from warning to picture, describing the scene toward which the whole discourse has been building, the day when the Son of Man returns to render final judgment on all the nations of the earth. It is addressed to ordinary disciples, men who would spend their lives waiting for that day, and it answers their deepest question: on what grounds will they, and all humanity, finally be judged? The verse reads, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne." Fausto Sozzini's reading of this verse begins exactly where the sentence itself begins, with the title Son of Man. The name Jesus applies to himself here, as he applies it constantly elsewhere. It is a Hebrew expression that first of all names him as one who shares fully in the human condition. The title carries a history. In the book of Daniel, a figure described as one like a son of man is brought before the Ancient of Days and is given dominion and glory and a kingdom, so that all peoples should serve him. The dominion in that vision is not something this figure possesses of himself. It is handed to him by another, by the Ancient of Days who sits enthroned above him. When Jesus takes up the same title to describe his own future coming in glory, he is deliberately placing himself inside that older picture of a human figure exalted and entrusted with rule, not asserting an eternal glory belonging to him by nature. His glory, the text says plainly, his own, and yet a glory received, the reward promised to the obedient servant who was first humbled to the point of death and was afterward raised and given, in the Gospel's own later words, all authority in heaven and on earth. Read this way, the scene that follows makes its full sense. The king separates the nations as a shepherd separates sheep from goats, and the standard he applies is entirely moral. Whether the hungry were fed, the stranger welcomed, the naked clothed, the prisoner visited. Those who did these things for the least of his brothers did them, he says, for him. Nothing here turns on confessing a hidden nature. Everything turns on a manner of life patterned after the mercy of the very man now seated on the throne. The coming of the Son of Man in glory is, among other things, the arrival of that future age in which the destiny of every soul, the life given or the death confirmed, is settled once and for all before the whole world, rather than privately and invisibly at each person's dying hour. A Trinitarian reading of this scene notices that the imagery, a heavenly throne, a full company of angels, all nations gathered for judgment, resembles language elsewhere reserved for God alone, since it is the Lord who is said to judge the peoples of the earth, and concludes that Christ here must be acting in his own underived, divine right. That conclusion is understandable, but the wording itself resists it at exactly the point where support is needed. Luke's record of the apostles preaching in Athens has them tell the philosophers there that God has set a fixed day for judging the inhabited world with justice and has entrusted that judgment to a man of his own choosing, a claim he underwrote for every listener by raising that same man from death. The judge of the nations is there named plainly. A man, appointed, not one acting from eternal and inherent right, but one commissioned and vindicated by resurrection. The Gospel of John says the same thing from another angle. The Father judges no one himself, but has handed over the whole business of judgment to the Son, granting him the right to carry it out for the stated reason that he is the Son of Man. That last phrase would be a strange explanation to offer if the real ground of the authority were a concealed deity. It is the natural explanation if the ground is a genuine grant, made to a genuinely human and now exalted mediator. Even the angels accompanying him fit this pattern better than the alternative, since throughout Scripture they appear as servants dispatched at God's command, the fitting retinue of a king raised to his throne by another's decree, not evidence of a shared uncreated essence. Taken on its own terms, set against the vision in Daniel that supplied its central title, and read alongside the ethical heart of the judgment it introduces, the verse presents Jesus as the man appointed and exalted by the one God to judge and to shepherd the nations, wearing a glory given him rather than possessed from eternity. The honor he receives on that throne returns, by his own consistent teaching, to the Father who set him there, and the truest response to his coming is not a claim about his essence, but a life of mercy shaped after his own. In closing, I want to encourage you, examine for yourself, search diligently, read the scriptures with an open and rational mind. Socinianism does not rest on tradition or church authority, but on the conviction that God's truth is rational, clear, and morally sublime. If this perspective has resonated with you and you wish to explore the biblical Unitarian view further, visit www.socinianismus.de for in-depth articles, studies, and reflections on central theological questions. If this video has been helpful, please support this work with a like and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another contribution on the unity of God, the teaching of Jesus, and the rational interpretation of Scripture. Until the next video.